Hi, Jagan. Welcome on board.
Right. Okay, Aparna, thank you. And good afternoon to all of you. I have been seeing there, it's been quite a tough session. You've learned a lot. So I presume you'll still remain awake for the next about a little over 45, 50 minutes till about 1 o'clock. Now, again, like what Aparna did, rather than you watch my face most of the time, I am going to also give some share screens with you. These are all some new, Saurav, you're okay? I got some, yeah. Okay, so here goes. Today, what we are going to learn before I move you on to share screen is we're going to look at three things. Budgeting, basically. Costing, and that's what we're going to start with. What is costing exactly? And then we go on to something called the break-even analysis to understand why this is important. It's very important, believe me. Then we get on to budgeting. In budgeting, there are two parts, your current budgeting and capital budgeting. I'll explain the difference, but we will not be seriously looking at capital budgeting today, but I'll tell you why about that. So I repeat, we'll do costing, we'll do break-even analysis, and we will do planning and budgeting. So with that, let's move on to the presentation. So let me start off by, you see, I'm going to shift between, I've got a Word presentation, I've got an Excel presentation, and I've got a PowerPoint. So we will have to toggle between that. You please put up, yesterday I tried it. You can do the toggling very fast. So that's not a problem. Am I sharing this? Is it shared? Can you, no.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's all shared?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just put this on. Okay, great. It's coming some peculiar shape here, but doesn't matter. 1 minute. Cost budgeting. Fundamentally, I want to ask you one question. Every time that you pay something, is it a cost? Let me start with this question. When you pay out cash, is it always a cost? We always associated cost with paying out cash. And answer to it is, when you pay out cash, it is not always a cost. You pay out cash to repay your loan, you pay out cash to repay dividends. These are not costs. Now, the contrary, almost all the others are costs. I just gave you two examples. Now, is it a cost when you don't pay anything now, but use the goods and services? Of course it is. Because you might buy something on credit. You don't pay anything now. You might pay it after 3 months, 4 months if somebody gives you a credit. But believe me, your cost has actually started and it is a cost. So please understand that just because you pay out something, it is not a cost. And just because you don't pay something, it is not a cost. So on that, let me come on to the next slide. Costing is the detailing of all elements of expenses that one incurs when manufacturing or rendering services. Previously, we had this discussion. People tell me, is costing only necessary for manufacturing? It isn't. Let me get out of this thing so that I can get your comments. You can write your comments as you want, so I will try and address it if it's possible. Planning is what needs to be done to ensure that you have the resources. Each of this, we will go into detail later. So let me start with costing. Now, the types of costs. I have just put down 4 or 5. In fact, you can leave out the semi-variable. I will give you one example of that, but that's not so important. You have fixed costs, you have variable costs, you have sunk costs, and you have opportunity costs. Fixed costs. Now, for fixed costs, let me get on back to our presentation here. Fixed costs are costs which you have committed to pay. Examples. Let me get on to the fixed cost first. Lease rentals. You've taken on your office at rent. It is a fixed, you have to pay the rent. If you don't pay the rent, you're going to be thrown out. Interest costs. You have borrowed money. You've been given a pattern in which you have to pay the interest. Again, it is there, cannot be helped. Salaries. Now, salaries may be fixed or maybe not. It depends upon what kind of a contract you have with the employee. Those of us who are employed in the real sense, we derive salaries, we are a fixed cost to the company. But for those who are paid on contract basis, who are paid on unit basis, who are paid on commission basis, those salaries need not be fixed. So the definition of fixed cost is basically what the first bullet says. Costs which have been committed to spend and cannot be changed in the short while. Never mind my English on this. Which means I can't suddenly stop paying rent or interest and nothing. These are fixed costs. What are then variable costs? These are costs which vary directly with the output, meaning it is a cost which will not be incurred if you do not do this job. I'll give you examples later when we get on to the text portion of it, and I'll give you some examples when we get on to the Excel portion. But typical examples of these broadly are materials. Because materials, as you have seen in the previous two sessions of Aparna, materials are your current asset. They remain, forget some rare cases like maybe bananas or fruits which are perishable. Let's take non-perishable, steel and stuff like that. They remain your asset and they don't become your cost till you actually use it. It remains as your asset. Remember, you've done your P&L from cost, from asset, it moves on to a cost into the P&L. Outsourced labor. Let's say you pay labor to do a particular job and you don't pay them when you don't do the job. That kind of thing is outsourced labor. Direct power are specific examples. External consultants for a job. Now, this is very, very specific to people who are in the business of providing software services. You might take on a job in which you have agreed to do certain things, but since you are not an expert, you hire an external consultant to do a part of that. Now, he gets a job only because your main job, and therefore his is variable. If you had not got the job, you would not have given it to him. So it's not a fixed cost, unlike a salary. So variable, very clearly, it varies, as the word implies, with the output. And it does not happen if there is no output. Moving on to sunk cost. Well, let me come back to sunk cost a little later. Let me get on to this. I repeat, variable costs which are directly connected with the making of the product. Now, I'm going to use one very simple example right through my presentation here, only because it is very simple and you can probably easily relate to it. It is trivial, but it has got a lot of meaning. So I'm giving an example of a thing. If you make sandwiches, and that's going to be my popular example right through. The cost of bread in making sandwiches is a variable cost. And we'll come to this later when you look at break-even. Or the cost of cloth in making of dresses. Or these days when masks are getting made, you might pay somebody so much for a mask. That becomes your variable cost. Means the product was not made, this cost not incurred. The second important thing in a variable cost, and that's what you must understand, is it varies directly with the product. If one sandwich has 2 slices, then 2 will have 4 slices, 3 will have 6. There is a regular pattern. If one shirt is made of 1 meter, there could be small exceptions. But by and large, if you're making a similar kind of size, 42 shirts, 100 of them, then if one shirt requires 1 meter, 2 shirts will require 2 meters, and there is a variable cost. And the cloth is same, the quantity is the same, then the variable cost is directly linked and proportional. And this is very important because if it is not directly linked, it might not be a variable cost. So please understand the concept of a variable cost. A, it will happen only when you make it. B, it will vary directly with the projects. Now we look at overhead costs. So let me go back to something here which I wanted to tell you. What is overhead costs? Overhead costs are costs. You hear this word very often, and that to these days, if you read the magazines and newspapers, they will say, oh, you must reduce your overheads. So what are these overheads? See, these overheads are expenses which are basically fixed costs. Overhead costs are costs which are incurred to keep the show running and do not vary directly with the product. Example, simple example. You might have a security guard who sits outside your office. Remember, there is a person who comes inside, he will show a register at you, and you got to write down your mobile number and where you came from. Nobody knows if that mobile number is right or wrong, but it is supposed to be written. And there is one chap whom you are paying for this purpose. Now, he is an overhead cost for you. Because whether you do anything inside your office or not, this man is going to take the list of everybody who came inside and their mobile numbers. Now, this is a trivial example. But other kind of overhead costs can be advertisement costs, routine maintenance of machinery. Even these days, when many of the factories are closed, and for that matter, many of you who are owning two-wheelers or four-wheelers, it is recommended that once a week at least start your car or two-wheeler, move it a little front and back, even if you don't take it out. This is routine maintenance. In machinery cases, much more so, otherwise it gets bad. Now, these things you incur, whether you make any product or not. So all these kinds of costs are basically called overhead costs. Then what's the difference between a fixed cost and an overhead cost? If both are the same, what exactly is the difference? There is no written difference, but the understanding in business mostly that most fixed costs are overhead costs. Now, overhead is a bad word. See, the idea is everybody says cut your overhead, try to make your overhead zero. You cannot make your overhead zero. There have to be people who want to help you run your business, even though they are not contributing directly to the making of the product. Fixed costs are those which have been committed. Salaries, you've entered into a salary negotiation and agreement with an employee, that is a fixed cost. You entered into a lease. I'm using these because they're clear. You could have many more such cases. For example, if you have leased your laptop and the minimum lease period is 6 months, that becomes a kind of a fixed cost for the period of that 6 months at least. So it can be anything where you have committed and it has to be paid. I've given you rent, monthly salaries, interest on loan. I have used, if you can read it, I have used to say not loan repayment. Remember, I already told you right at the beginning, a loan repayment is not a cost. And that's covered in a totally different subject, not yet. Other overhead costs also include, suppose there is a special marketing show which you conduct for one particular instance, which is not committed, which you decide on the spur of the moment and you spend it. Now that is not a fixed cost, but it's nevertheless an overhead cost, because let's say you are selling a biscuit and you put out an ad in a particular school evening function. Let us say school has the annual school day and you put out your board saying, I make these biscuits. Now, because of that, not a single biscuit might get sold, but nevertheless, you have incurred it. So that becomes a kind of an overhead cost, if not a fixed cost. Now, there could be some gray areas. I saw some of the question earlier in terms of insurance. Insurance is normally, there are two kinds of insurances basically. The insurance that you take on your plant and machinery, if you have, or the insurance you take on your building, if you own the office, or the interiors that you have done. These are all fixed costs because these things are there and you have to pay the insurance. Otherwise, if something goes wrong, you will not be covered. But however, if there is a customer and he wants a specific insurance taken for some specific service, now this could be a liability insurance, which means you're doing a software product for him and you have taken insurance for yourself so that in case there is a problem from him, you have to pay up and you will in turn get paid. Now, those kind of things again becomes a variable cost and not a fixed cost, because it is variable to that specific product and you will not incur that particular cost when you do another product. So these are not hard and fast or cast in stone, but I'm giving you, that's why the principle by how you can operate. I'm going to leave one question with you. If you're a single software engineer freelancing as a proprietor business, how would you cost your services? Let's say you're staying at home, you got your own laptop. Do you have any cost? Or you don't have a cost, you're all free. Think about it. We'll come back to it a little later if some of you still want to discuss it. As I said, the overhead costs are marketing, the overhead costs of factory, admin, stationery, all these are overhead costs. I don't have the time to go into those details, so I'm not going into that. So let me get on to something which I told you earlier, sunk costs. Now, this is very important for all of you to know. Some of it may become relevant in view of what we are going through right now and how you will have to look at it later. Sunk costs are costs which cannot be retrieved no matter what you do. It's sunk, it's done. It's a result of a decision you took some time back. Maybe it's worked out, maybe it's not worked out. I'll give you a trivial example will be, you buy 2 tickets for a movie. And each ticket, I don't know, there's a bomb. So you will pay $200 per ticket, so 400 tickets, both of you go inside. and you find out you never ever seen a movie worse than this in your entire life, you get a splitting headache in the next 5 minutes, in the first 5 minutes. You won't get your money back. Have you ever found any theater fellow giving you money back because the movie is not good? No. So you have spent. Now, what's the choice do you have? You can either sit through the entire movie because you've paid and get your headache worsened, maybe the headache spreads to other parts of your body, or you can decide to write off that expense and move on in life, come out immediately and try to do something else. Now, the sunk costs I've given you here are interior costs for a new office, but unfortunately, you've got to close that office, but you spend money, write off. Wrappers made for a product which cannot be used. You thought it will be used. It was a nice wrapper. So there are examples like this. The last bullet is what I've said. Sunk cost can either not at all be retrieved or retrieved at a large cost. Now, you have to understand in your business, when you say, let me forget that cost, I'm not going to recover it. Let me move on in life. And that's the reason I brought in the word sunk cost. This is different from those of you who heard of the word opportunity cost. By word opportunity, it means you have lost a chance for something else because you have chosen one particular option. Again, going on, you're opening an office in one location instead of another. You should have opened in, let us say, Besant Nagar. You ended up opening it in Anna Nagar, for example. Now, that was an opportunity cost because you would have made much more money in Besant Nagar than in Anna Nagar. I mean, both are nice places. I'm just, whatever names come to my voice, I'm saying that. Or a restaurant which without non-veg dishes at all to attract vegetarians, but vegetarians are not attracted. Are you going to then change your whole profile? No, those are opportunity costs. Like this, there will be some costs. It could be a research done in a stream. You do a research on a particular thing, then find out that it's a waste of time having done that research, but you still got to pay the guy because you've contracted with. Now, these are cases where there's an opportunity cost, and not to be confused with sunk cost, and of course not to be confused with variable fixed, as I've given you all those various examples. I'm removing all these fine things as you go on overhead. There's plenty, but I'm not getting into it. The common phrasing, wherever you read articles on cost, you will normally find manufacturing direct, which is material, labor, overheads, and manufacturing indirect, which is, now why is this? I've given a list of costs here. I'm not getting into that. I don't think we have the time. So let's move on to something else that I want to show you here. Before I get on to the budgeting, please look at what I have done. I'm taking a simple case where there is a material cost. Selling price is 10 rupees. Your material cost is 5 rupees. All material, all variable expenses. And then there's a variable cost, power 0.5. Now in this case, come here, if you can see my cursor over here, your variable cost per unit is 5.5 rupees as material cost, variable power as 0.5. I hope this thing is still going on because I'm here. I'm not able to see the comments, or is my voice audible, etc. I'm assuming it is, because unless how do I look into comments without, let me stop share to see voice. Okay, we are not able to see. Are you, PPT is it still not visible? Can someone key in there? Never mind on the PPT. I'm moving on to this one. Is the Excel visible? Can someone just, I'm on the chat thing. Excel is visible. Great. All of you said yes. Thank you. I'm going ahead. Now, where my cursor is placed, it's 5.5. And therefore, your variable cost is 5.5, variable material cost is 5, variable power is 5. You'll see only one. So if I'm on Excel, you will not see the other one. So let's move on to that. Now let's come on to fixed costs. Your fixed costs are salaries, which is 16,000. Your rent is 3,000. Therefore, your total fixed cost, where my cursor is 19,000. Your total cost is 19 plus 33, 52,000. And what is interesting is where I put my cursor. And this is what is going to be very, very important to you when costing is done and when budgeting is done. And I'll move on to budgeting shortly. You see the cost per unit was 8.67 per unit when you were making 6,000 components. When you made 9,000, went down to 7.61, and when you did 10,000, it went down even to 7.4. And obviously the 10,000 becomes 20,000 without any increase in fixed cost. The 7.4 will keep coming down. Please note, variable cost always remains 5.5. but the fixed cost keeps coming down. Therefore, when you do your budgeting, when you do your costing, you have to plan how many units you will make. We have done over 20 minutes on this. I will just take a pause to look at any comments you might have on this before I move on to break even, which is equally critical. Please send the message if you have time to ask. Let me move on to break even. Maybe there are some issues there. Can we have a look at the Excel one? Certainly, we can have a look at Excel. That's what it's there for. You can see the Excel. Somebody's asked for it, Karthik. I put the Excel back. You have the variable cost in red. You have the cost per unit is in row 26. I've not colored it in red. Okay. Right. What is the purpose of budgeting? Let me come on. Let's move on to break even, then I'll come on to budgeting. Break even analysis. Now, why do we do break even analysis? That is more important. Okay, sorry, you can't see my PowerPoint. I have to come out of stop share and then I will get onto. It is a problem. I think I know the mistake I made. Right. Can you now see my PowerPoint? Because now I have shared the PowerPoint. Just any one of you say yes, please. So that I can. Great. That's enough. Thank you. Now you look at it. Break-even analysis is a very simple trading example. Again, I'm going to give you a very, very simple. The idea of break-even analysis is to find out, are you pricing your product properly? Rather than do this here, and I'll come back to it because I have a thing here. This looks a bit scary. But I will not do this before I take you here. Let me go through a first document here. Break-even is important because only then you can tell whether you're actually losing money on every sale. No entrepreneur wants to lose money on every sale. Nobody in the world. It means that you will realize it is cheaper to do nothing. Sit back in your chair and watch Tom and Jerry rather than do your product, because every time you do your product, you're losing more money. Let me explain why. And break even, what it means, we will just come to it shortly. It is important because you heard of this concept called going concern, which means your organization has to keep running. That's what is meant by a going concern. So let me go back to my bread example. Sandwich cannot be simpler than this. And principle is the same, whether it's a sandwich or you're making casting for somebody. If a loaf of bread of 10 slices costs 50 bucks, one slice costs 5 bucks. Simple arithmetic. Assume a sandwich has 2 slices, naturally. And the butter and the tomato, whatever you put inside, costs you 1 rupee. Trivial example, please understand, it's a very serious concept. The sandwich, then 2 slices, 10 rupees, butter 1 rupee, the total cost of sandwich is 11, meaning the sandwich seller is paying out a cash. As Aparna said it, cash, bank, all the same thing. It is leaving his property of 11 rupees for making the sandwich. Obviously, if he does not understand that it's costing him 11, he has not calculated what the loaf is, he has not counted the number of slices, he has not valued the butter and the tomato and the cucumber cost, then he does not know it costs 11. He might be happily selling it for 10 rupees, thinking he is making a profit. Now, what happens if he sells at less than 11? It's a wrong costing, because every sandwich he's paying out 11 rupees to somebody and getting 10 rupees from the customer, meaning he's losing 1 rupee on every sandwich cash payout. Had he not done anything, at least he would have saved that 11 rupees which he paid out. You understand? It is better that he stops selling anything. It is that important for you to understand the concept of variable cost, because if you sell less than variable cost, you are heading for a disaster. And if you don't know what your variable cost is, stop everything, first find that out. But let us assume that he's able to sell it for a higher price. So 11, fine. Finally, some bright fellow has gone and told him, hey, it cost you 11 rupees. What are you doing? He says, okay. I will sell it at 14 rupees. Market also agrees and pays him 14 rupees. That is not a problem. Is okay. You'll come back and say, you only told me 11 rupees is my variable cost. I'm now selling it at 14. So life is wonderful. I'm going to make so much of money. I don't know what to do with it. But is this enough? There are other costs, like in his labor. Maybe he has to pay some rent. Maybe he has license charges, as you know what I mean by that. Maybe he has a helper to buy his stuff. What happens to all that? 11 rupees goes in payout for the sandwich. It is at that 3 rupees he has to recover all these expenses. The question arises, how many sandwiches must he sell with this 3 rupees profit per sandwich so that after meeting the cost of the bread and the butter, he can meet other expenses? And that number of sandwiches that he has to sell is called the break-even. Break-even is both in terms of numbers, it is both in terms of value, because we're taking a simple case where there's only one product and one price. So if I know the number, I automatically know the value. This is a little difficult. If it is a little difficult to understand it by words, let us look at it from the point of view of a presentation. Let me go back to the Excel. Now in Excel, let us look at break-even analysis. Simple break-even analysis. Sale price, a trader selling toothpaste. I'm assuming you can see it. I keep mentioning that because after all the examples, you still can't see it, then I'm going to have a problem. So one of you say, Karthik, or someone say, yes, you are able to. No, I've taken it out right now. Okay, I'm assuming you can see it. Yes, great. Let's move on. Yeah, all right, that's enough. Thank you. The sale price of the toothpaste is 20 rupees per toothpaste. The cost of buying the toothpaste, he's a retailer, so he's buying from a wholesaler at 16 rupees. Obviously, he will not sell at 16 rupees. Go back to my sandwich case. Huh? So 16 he will sell. But is 16 enough if he sells at 17, 18? Sale price is 20. Remember, the market might not always give you the sale price. You might have to sell some things at a discount. Not maybe a toothpaste, but there could be other things. Rent of the shop is 2,500 and salary of the shop boy is 6,000. Now, first, I'm asking the first question where my bullet is. What is his contribution? The word contribution is a new word I'm introducing here. And it is nothing but your revenue per unit minus your variable cost. Very simple, I repeat. Your revenue per unit minus your variable cost. Why do I call it contribution? Because it is this difference, the revenue minus variable cost, which contributes towards your fixed costs. And therefore the word contribution. It is with this 4 rupees that you're going to recover and pay the salary of the shop boy. You're going to pay the rent. So the logic question is that how many sandwiches must he sell? Now, if you take the total fixed cost, it's 6,000 plus 2,500 is 8,500 is his total fixed cost. Simple arithmetic. If it's going to be 8,500, which he has got to do by 4, he's got to sell 2,125 toothpastes to break even. That is his break even per month, per year, whatever you want to call it. I've taken it per month because the rent is per month and the salary is per month. Now, he has to decide. Do you really think you can sell 2,125 toothpastes per month? Maybe he can, maybe he cannot. So he might come up with the idea, why do I need this salary boy, this shop boy? I will do my own selling. So I knock off this fellow. You see, now what has happened, his fixed cost now comes down to only 2,500, which is the rent of the shop. Do you see what happens to his break-even here? I'm just putting it in red for easy view. From 2,125, it now comes to 625. That's all he needs to sell now as compared to 2,125. So isn't this much better? Yes and no. In that, you had a boy who was standing at the counter, taking money, giving the change, taking the toothpaste, giving it, all that work he was doing. Now, you have to do it yourself. You think it's worth doing that? Maybe you have better things to do. Maybe in that 1 month, you're a software engineer, you'll be earning much more. This is a side business. If it's a side business, please pay that 6,000, try to sell 2,000 units because you will make much more money by writing software. You might even get out of this later, but that's just an example. So you have to decide what overheads, what fixed costs can you reasonably cut. And if you believe that there's no way you can cut any more costs and the margin will not increase, can even come down, then you've got to seriously consider whether you should be in that business or not. But let me not be negative. I'm not saying you get out. There will be instances when sometimes you cannot. Sometimes we do sell at a loss. I don't know how many of you have done marketing, but I sell at a loss because it's a loss leader. I sell something. You know, if you go to buy a product, they'll give you something else free. So that after some time you love that something else and you start buying that, and then its total revenue goes up. But those are business tactics. So long as you do it after understanding it properly as to where your costs are, you don't have a problem. But if you do it without understanding, you will have to down shutters and become insolvent in a matter of a couple of months. Now, coming back, this, oh gosh, how do I move this over? Yeah. You have to sometimes, I've given you a very trivial example. We're running into 12:40, so I will be moving on to budgeting and planning. But before that, taking a simple case where if you're a manufacturing unit, you will tell me that the toothpaste is also simple here. So I'm taking a slightly more difficult one. Let's say there is an order for you to make a particular manufactured piece. And you've done your calculations and you found the material cost of that is 3,000 over here. You found the direct outsourced labor. I've just taken 25%, 750, because you got to get some machining done outside, some annealing done outside, something done outside. So your total variable cost is 3,750. You forget this one. We have not quoted 6,000 yet. Leave this. Let me remove it so that you don't get distracted. Right now, the contribution shows negative because there is no revenue. So don't worry about it. But your variable cost is 3,750. Now your rent for the factory is 20,000, your fixed salary is at 10,000, your depreciation is 15,000. Let's take it for a year. Simple. Now, how will you cost your product? Unlike here, there is no MRP, there is no nothing. When you go back to sale price, you have to keep on doing toggling. This is what is meant by doing analysis of break-even. So I started with 6,000 because I'd done it before the session. When I sell it at 6,000, my variable cost is 3,750. My contribution is 2,250. And the number of units to sell, very simple, 45,000 divided by 2,250 becomes 20. And it doesn't matter whether this is monthly, annually, whatever it is. That's not important here. What is important is if this is your annual expense, then you got to sell 20 units annually. If this is your monthly expense, I'm talking rent, fixed salary, depreciation, then the 20 units has to be done monthly, which your weekly expense, and got to do it weekly. So you understand the period is not so important. Question is, how do you quote? This is the way you quote. You start off with your variable cost. You look at, now let us argue. You believe you cannot sell 20 units. You can sell only 12 units. More than that, it is impossible. Then, remember what I showed you there? When we did unit costs, you can't sell 9,000, you can sell only 6,000, then your unit cost is actually 8.67. And you got to bring here, increase that 6,000. You will have to increase it to maybe 8,000. Let us see, if you make it 8,000, yes, you have to sell only 11. That's all you can sell. Yes, sometimes the market, you can't get 8,000, you can only say, oh, that's a business, you got to play. But do you understand that one leads to another? You plan your revenue, you decide what you sell. On that word of planning, I'm not showing you this chart. Oh, sorry, again, I have to stop share and come back. Share screen. This is a very scary one, which I don't want to show unless I'm there, but actually it's extremely simple for those who know a little bit graphics. Fixed cost is fixed, so straight line, regardless how many units you do. Variable cost, I keep on telling you, 1 sandwich, 2 sandwich, 3 sandwich, 4 slices. It goes straight line. Total cost is nothing but the variable cost plus fixed cost, so it will be parallel to the variable cost. Revenue, of course, is on its own, and revenue cuts the total cost at some level. Look at the x-axis. This example shows 20 is your break-even. This is not complicated. Only thing, if you look at it suddenly with too many yellows and blues and reds, you might get scared. But try this out. It's the simplest way of finding out where you are. I am again pausing here. I got some chairs. Shouldn't we consider variable cost in break-even analysis? Of course, you consider variable cost in break-even analysis. If you looked at it, I told you what is a variable cost. See, again, let me repeat. The revenue minus the variable cost gives you contribution. If you don't know variable cost, you don't know your contribution. If you don't know your contribution, you do not know how many units to sell to recover your fixed cost. So variable cost is the most critical thing in break-even analysis. You don't know your variable cost, please find it. I asked one question that if you are a single entrepreneur and all that, how would you cost? Any of you have time in this next 15 minutes that I have left? Please answer, because I'm sitting at home, I'm writing a software and I'm selling it. I'm making my revenue on that. I don't employ anybody else. I have got my own brains. So no cost, I'm free. Well, interesting. Please think about it. Moving on, let me come on to the third part of what I said I will tell you is budgeting. Budgeting essentially done to understand how your company will move over the year. And now, in the current circumstances, I think this is something very critical for all of you to undertake in the next week or so. And hopefully we'll all be out of it. But then, you have to redo whatever you've done in the month of February, March, if you've done anything. But basically, the budgeting will comprise of balance sheet, P&L, and cash flow. And you've done this in great detail with Aparna, so I'm not even touching it. Except, believe me, as far as budgeting is concerned, your cash flow will probably have much more importance than even your balance sheet and P&L, particularly for startups when you're trying to get out of a situation or trying to break into a market. You can forget balance sheet and P&L for a little while, because if you don't get your cash flow in order, I'm hoping you're seeing my slide. I have no comment, therefore my share screen is valid. All right, the cash flow becomes critical. In a slightly lighter vein, a budget actually tells us what we cannot afford. But unfortunately, it doesn't keep us from buying it, because we believe optimistically as businessmen that fine, let me do it. I'm sure I'll be able to recover the cost. There's nothing wrong. That's how businessmen should be. Because consultants are sometimes very, very conservative. If you listen only to consultants, you don't get anywhere. That doesn't mean consultants are bad. I'm one myself. But must understand, the businessman has that bit of extra spark in him, and he has to make a judgmental call on whether he should buy something and make it work. The difference between budget and forecasts is the difference is critical. I'll now come on to some details of budgeting, how we do about that. Coming back to this, let me get out of stop share and share screen. This is a little complicated each time to get into it. Okay, great. In budgeting, first is timeline. Macro planning is usually done for 1 year. We normally take 1 year as a financial year, which is April to March, and we do a planning for that 1 year. The planning should involve essentially, what's going to be my revenue? Now, if you're making more than one product, then a breakup of the products, which is going to give you what revenue in terms of numbers, in terms of revenue. If it's a new company, then I would advise to do the budget quarter-wise, because 1 year is too long a time for a new company. If you're a Hindustan Lever kind of company, yes, you can do it for 1 year. But if you're a startup, my strong advice is do it a quarter-wise. Do a quarter-wise breakup. You can add it up for a year, but your focus should be on quarter-wise. Goals. What are the goals of planning? Macro planning will consist first of what you can produce and deliver and what the market will bear. Now, the two things I mentioned here. What you can produce and deliver. Do you have the wherewithal? If you say, for example, oh, each month I will do 5 market studies. Can you do 5 market studies? Do you have the people to do 5 market studies, or can you do only 2? So you must be aware that you can do it. Similarly, that simple software engineer, can he write 5 programs a month? Maybe he can write only 2. So that's what his capacity. First, make sure what your capacity is. What can you do? If your production or skill set has some constraints, then bring that constraint into planning. There's no point pretending that you can make Apollo 11 aircraft here when you can't do it. Then break up the macro planning, if it is done for a year, which is typical, into quarters. And at the beginning of each quarter, break it up monthly, and at the beginning of each month, break it up on a weekly or day basis. And I'll tell you why it is important, because this helps you 2 things. This helps you avoid a mistake. One is a typical error mistake. I'm not talking about that. But you're mistaken assuming you'll be able to do certain things when you can't. Remember, It is not just your capacity. I'll come to the other point a little later. So I put it in green. In any manufacturing sector, the budget will start with the physical volumes you can achieve, because you're manufacturing. There has to be a physical product. So start with what you can do. How many machines do you have? What can you produce? In the service sector, you have to evaluate your skill sets to see what service you can manufacture. That's also called manufacturing. We call it provide. Same thing. Proprietors are working alone. Now I'm giving the answer, though I waited for you. Should budget on the time and resource availability of whatever they offer. How much time can you spend on it? You might have to also get some outsourcing done. Do you have the resources to get it done? Resource not just in terms of money. Do you know who is going to do it for you? Do you have a set of people who can do it for you? If not, don't commit to something, or reduce your commitment to what you can deliver and then proceed. From here, you move on to financial status. From this, you will see important. And as Aparna mentioned it earlier, what's a cash working capital? It's all very nice, you know. Well, I can make 100 pieces a month, so I will make 1,200 pieces a year, or 9,600 pieces in a half year, etc., etc. All that is fine. But remember, once you make a product, you got to sell it. Once you got to sell it, most important, you got to get the money for it. Now, if you're just making, selling, and not collecting money, you will have to stop making after some time because you've run out of cash to buy raw materials. And therefore, you have to figure out what your working capital is. There's no harm giving credit. Business works on credit. So how much of credit you can give? Can you give depending on the product, are you giving a week's credit? Are you taking advance actually? Are you giving 2 months credit? Build all that into your planning. And then figure out what exactly. You might find that it's nice to make 10 products a month, but the problem is you don't have enough cash after June unless money starts coming in. And money doesn't come in that easily because you're giving 1.5 month credit. So you might have to taper down your production. That's what this will tell you. Expense, once the above is done, the value of all revenues and costs need to be incurred for providing these services has to be chopped out and the budgets arrived at. Now you come to your P&L. You saw how all this is linked to your cash flow, your P&L. There's nothing but your P&L now. If you do all this, what is the revenue you're going to get? What is the costs you're going to incur? How much profits are you going to make? There are other fixed costs also that will come in, and that's what you're going to do. You see how at the beginning I told you your balance sheet, P&L, and cash flow, how they're all bringing in. The balance sheet, surprisingly, is less important because the balance sheet is more derived from your P&L in this particular stage of monitoring, because ultimately it'll come to that. Monitoring. Much more than planning and budgeting. Planning and budgeting you will do in the months, typically February, March. This year, of course, is an unusual year. So you might go back to the drawing table now and start doing it. But more than that, it is the monitoring of the budget that's absolutely critical. A budget is on a piece of paper. A budget is a speculation. A budget is a forecast. What will happen? We don't know. We're assuming certain things will happen, and we're going to make sure it happens. Only then our budget happens. So it is the monitoring of the budget that can assist you in making changes as the market demands for any resource constraints. For example, let me take one example that I've given here. If a key resource in an IT company goes, let's say you're running a small IT company, there is 3-4 of you, and one person decides to leave for better prospects or whatever it is. Now, he or she was getting a salary of maybe 20,000 a month, 30,000 a month, whatever it is. Now she's quit. Yes, you can get it done through outsource. You know somebody else who will do it for you. But that's going to cost you more than what it would have cost you had you paid your salary. Then the impact has to be then brought into the budget. Oh my God, now you can't go back to your customer and ask for more money. So the customer is going to give you 1.5 lakhs for the job. Now, whether you've got a salaried person doing it or whether you outsource it, that's your problem. But then you realize that your profit margin, your cash flow on that particular service contract that you're doing has actually come down. Redo your balance sheet. So redo your budget. So the budget, as you will see, becomes something that is continuously getting monitored during, and the smaller company that you are, you need to do it more often. I'm going to stop with just mentioning what is capital budgeting. I'm going to take the last 5 minutes, but allow a lot of questions for 2-3 minutes. Capital budget. What's the difference between capital budgeting and the budgeting that I've been talking about all this while? All this while I've been talking about what would be typically a process. That means this year I'm doing manufacturing. What are the budgeting? Capital budgeting, on the other hand, read the first line. The budgeting for certain expenses which would yield revenue over a long time. In manufacturing, if you buy a lathe machine, let's go back, forget manufacturing, take software. I buy, you have this lovely architectural oriented design software products. Let's say you buy one of them, quite expensive. AutoCAD used to be very expensive. I heard there are others there. That you cannot recover the cost of the AutoCAD maybe in the same 1 year. You might recover the cost over 2.5 or 3 years. So I'm incurring a certain cost with a revenue spread over many number of years. It could be you're opening a new branch. It could be a branding your product, and you're branding your product, going to spend a lot of money. Not going to come back this year. So the problem is that costs are incurred today, this year, but the income is over a long period, which means if you see where my cursor is, there is a mismatch in time. And even if you borrow money and pay it back over the years, there is an interest cost every year, which you will have to consider. And therefore, if you really want to evaluate whether this is worth it or not, you got to understand the time value of money, which is outside the scope of today. Because otherwise, the danger you will make for those of you who will remember in the school, they used to say you cannot add apples and oranges. Sometimes we say, what are you talking apples and oranges? You can't add them. Meaning, a rupee today is not a rupee 1 year from now, is not a rupee 5 years from now. So you can't just compare a rupee today and a rupee 3 years later and say, boss, I'm getting 1 rupee after 3 years, no problem. Spending 1 rupee, I'm getting 1 rupee 10 paisa after 2 years. So I'm making a profit. You're not making a profit, my friend. You're making a loss, but you don't even know it. And that's where the time value of money comes inside. We cannot go into that session here because that's a little more complicated, and I don't want to get into it. So I just want to get back. I will take the question. Let me get back to your I'm not taking you back to the spreadsheet. I will take you back to the PowerPoint, which you can see. The most important thing here, and I would like to say this, if you look at, and this is something critical I want to tell you, the CEO or entrepreneur is the key factor here. And for those of you entrepreneurs and those of you who are in a senior position, please personally monitor. This is not something you delegate. Even if you delegate somebody to do the arithmetic, you got to sit with them to keep understanding it and as frequently as is possible. Aparna said, you can even drop the balance sheet. Remember, you can drop the balance sheet every day at 5 o'clock. Every evening, you can have a balance sheet with today's technology. That's not a problem, but that may not be required. A balance sheet is a snapshot in time. It's like one video shot you take from a camera, but your PL is like a video that you take on this thing. Manage cash flow. And the last line in red, which I would like to emphasize, and this is a mistake very often that is made, don't confuse sales or profit with cash. You can make a lot of profit and have no money to pay your salaries. You can, on the other hand, make a loss and have money to pay your salaries because you just borrowed from the bank. The two are completely different, and you must understand the two differences. With that, I'm stopping the share and I'm getting back now to any comments you have. Could you share templates? What about retail chain pharmacies? Rajesh, could you just explain what would you mean by retail chain pharmacies? Because as I'm concerned, if it's a chain, which means it's the same branded pharmacy, as far as they're concerned, we've got 6 shops in Chennai. You've got to do the cash planning for all the 6 shops together. One advantage is if something is selling in required in Ananagar, but it's available in Kodambakam, you can move it from Kodambakam to Ananagar, but that's where your monitoring comes into effect. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm answering your question. I will take it as one single thing and keep translating. If there are different pharmacies and they are your franchisees, then it's a little more complicated, but the principle is still the same. Could you please share templates for balance sheet, P&L, and cash flow statements so that we can use it for a startup? Well, Aparna, I think she would be better at that. But let me tell you one thing. Deshmukh, let me tell you one thing. There is no template per se that you can use for your startup, because each startup has slightly different issues that they got to go through. In fact, even the P&L can be, P&L is a broad word. P&L means there's a revenue and there is a cost and there is a profit and there's a tax. That's what P&L means. But the structure of a P&L can become quite different. So I would frankly tell any one of you, I mean, you will get standard formats on the web, plenty of them. But I would strongly suggest that you look at your, if you're a startup, if you're a small company, look what you need and then write out your own format. Get your friend to write a format, much better. Then you can graduate onto your standard. When you're grown big enough, then you get your big auditors like KPMG and all who will come. They have enough and more formats to keep you ready for the next 100 years. In budgeting, how is it possible to foresee a market 12 months from now? Foreseeing market, I have no idea. No, be very honest. In January, we foresaw something. You don't. You have to make a reasonable assumption. But one thing you have now learned possibly with all this is, how can you prepare yourself for some rapid changes? In other words, those are aware there is a plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D. So maybe there is some more focus to be given on a plan B and a plan C in the event that a plan A is not coming, which means that you don't depend too much and maybe spend too much on something that's going to happen over the next 8 months. You spend a little by little, and as it's happening, you increase it. That's what I believe that you can do, Jawahar. Now, if you're asking me, my personal, I'm a born optimist, and I believe that all this scare after it's over, the market is going to come back quite heavily. But then, that's got nothing to do with my class that I'm taking. So I don't want any of you to come back to me saying, hey, you only said it's great, and I spend money, now pay me back. Sorry, I'm not doing that. SWOT analysis can apply for capital budgets. I will not call it, well, yes, you can call it SWOT analysis. That applies when, for example, you have more than one long-term options. Okay, let me explain. You have to start a branch. You are selling, you are in the product of, let's say, some food that you're selling, prepared food, which is very popular. Or my friend Sandwich, there's a guy here called Royal Sandwich. He actually has branches, a small guy. Now, his capital budgeting issue can be, do I open in, I have a choice of Adayar, I have a choice of Kodambakam, I have a choice of maybe Perumgudi or whatever it is. I've got 5, 6 choices. How do I compare? And that's where your SWOT will probably come in. I would say, if you're doing a SWOT, then on the OMR, what kind of people are living in OMR? Are they likely to buy your product? On the contrary, from a threat, are there too many people already selling that? Weakness, but depending on your product, coming back again, sandwich, if you know only how to make a standard sandwich with a butter and a tomato, that's a weakness. Because today, there are about 150 kinds of sandwiches that are made. So are you capable of delivering all that? That becomes, so you can do a kind of a SWOT analysis, but that's provided you know your business very well. But the capital budgeting I'm talking about is essentially financial, while a SWOT will build into the financial. I don't have any other questions right now. Is there anything else, or what is the better number we should look for in an asset ratio? Kubendran, a question you should have asked some time back to Aparna. The point is, if you're looking for an asset ratio, the problem in giving you what is a better number, you've written better, that means you have some number in mind. See, asset ratio, basically, if you're looking at how much you're turning over asset, the more you turn over the asset, you put 4. The more you turn over the asset, the better it is for you. The problem is, do you think you can do it? That's all I'm concerned. I have one laptop and I can create 500 different programs on that one laptop. Wow, that's fantastic, but can I do it really? So the question is, maximize it. I'm not giving a number. Just maximize. The number becomes relevant in things like, as Aparna has said, in like debt equity ratios and DSCR, where your bankers are very keen on that number, not you so much, but your bankers want to know, is your debt equity ratio 1 or 1.5 or 2, or is your DSCR ratio, etc., etc. So please do that. Minimum of 4, well, as I said, maximize it. There's no minimum. The minimum will come from, is your going concern? Are you able to make profits even on an asset, your turnover to asset ratio of 2? If you're still making profits, no problem. There's no minimum. Generally, Deshmukh again, generally investors look for better unit economics, profitability and positive gross margin pitch tests. But for early stage startup, it is quite difficult. What would you suggest to such startups? Now, investors don't necessarily see, there are different kinds of investors. If you go for angel investors, they are not just looking at better unit economics. Of course, they want it. Of course, they want it. But the point is, they are also aware that you cannot get it immediately. First, you got to make your product popular. And that could be, and this could be a case where you've been selling it slightly below cost so that you make people know it. So for an earlier stage startup, you don't have to keep on increasing and sell yourself only on better unit economics. You've got to sell yourself as to why your product is better and why you believe your product will have a market. That's more important than going strictly arithmetically on gross margin, because your gross margin will build itself. But you have to convince your investors that you will be able to raise your gross margins, because ultimately they need profits, but not initially. They are willing to put up with. I mean, the examples of Flipkart and all that, I don't know if you people know how much of loss Flipkart is making, but there are people doing that. Just a couple of minutes, we're already overshot our time by 6 minutes. So if there is another question or two, we are planning to expand a pharmacy. Oh, that's why you're Rajesh. We're thinking about option between franchising to third party who has own shop under management. Which one will it do? As already we have kickstarted an online presence named Marandakade. Well, between franchising and third party, franchising is, I'll tell you, it is not just a pharmacy, anywhere. Franchising is one extent is slightly cheaper cost for you, because you can take an advance from them and you can make him pay for some of the interiors, the shop rent, etc., which doesn't come under you. So your cost is lower, certainly, when you do a franchising. The problem in a franchising is he's carrying your name. Now, if he puts up a very shoddy show that gives wrong medicines, for example, or keeps a shop dirty or doesn't respond well, his name will not be known by anybody. You will have a problem. Okay, so the call is yours. You get very good franchisees. I would suggest start off with that. But if you can manage your own, at least some numbers, maybe you have 5, 6, and then you go on for franchising, you have a much better idea on how to deal with franchising. Okay. Thank you, all of you. I think we have to end here, Saurav. Can you take over? Because with that, it's over. Cash flow mandate. Of course, it's mandatory for all companies. Raj Khanna, without cash flow, you die. For me, cash flow is everything in life, and that's it. Once you got your cash flow in perfect order, the other things will fall in place. Contribution to a job work industry where customer profile is different. Okay, I'll answer this question. A job work industry does not have a standard contribution. So you have to work. That's why I gave you the other example. I said, how much will you charge for that particular, where I specify what is the variable cost. Variable cost I'll be able to find out for that particular unit, which for whatever you're doing your job work. The question you have to decide is, how much of your fixed cost are you going to recover in this particular job alone? You can't normally recover 100% of them. So if you decide that you want to recover 10%, 15% of a cost, then you know how much a fixed cost has to be allotted or allocated to this particular customer when he gives you the thing. Remember, a job work is very, very different. It's not standard. You can do very different kinds of job works. On the other hand, there are standard job work. You have a standard job work where all you will do is wrap the soaps in a particular wrapper and give it. That's easier to do it. But if different products like an engineering workshop, then you've got to evaluate specifically for that how much it costs and how much of fixed cost do you want to bear by that. Thank you.